Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at GOTO. And what I want to share with you today are some insights from 5 years since the book was published, Team Topologies. And so to make it very practical and show some examples of different organizations adopting these ideas and how they help them. I won't say much about specific about the book. I want to really focus on principles and show you some practical applications. But I do want to just get a sense of how many people in this room sort of heard about these patterns, the 4 types of teams and the 3 interaction modes. I see a fair amount of hands, so it seems like about half the room. So patterns are really easy to misunderstand as well, right? So some people might have read the book, hopefully. Some people have heard about these ideas. Maybe they saw another talk, or just a colleague told them about these ideas about team topologies. So last year, James Lewis, at this conference, was talking about team topologies as one of the most important books written in the last decade, which makes me very happy, obviously. But at the same time, I would be very wary when you hear this, even if it's coming from James Lewis. Because in fact, most of the challenges organizations have today cannot be solved just with one approach, right? Team topology is not going to solve all your organizational challenges by itself. And so it's actually important to understand that even if we have some common patterns and that have been adopted, it's easy to misunderstand or try to adopt them in ways that don't fit the challenges of our organization. So I don't know if people are familiar with Comic Agile. It's quite a big following on LinkedIn, so they do this comics every week or every other week. The authors are actually based in Denmark. I don't know if they're here, would be funny, but so they published this comic about sort of some of the patterns in team topologies. And at first I was like a little bit afraid, what does this mean? Are they sort of criticizing the ideas? But after the first reaction was like, actually, this is really good. It just shows that there can be a lot of misinterpretations, right? And so we need to put things in context, obviously. So if you can read the comic, it says, streamline team, we're so cross-functional and generalized that we're not really good at anything. So obviously the point is that you have enough skills and cross-functionality in the team for whatever service or product that you need to build, right? Not that you have all the skills in the world in the same team. And then the enabling team is saying, we're supposed to teach our competencies to other teams, but we just do the work ourselves. It's much faster, right? So that's actually quite common to see in organizations where this question will come up. Why do we need people enabling others? If they're the experts, they should just do the work. But the problem is that there's too much work for these people to do, right? And then the complicated system team. People think that our system requires very advanced competencies, but we just don't want to share our knowledge. We want to keep our little kingdom. So yeah, obviously, that is not the point of complicated subsystem team. In fact, we had a master class in the last 2 days, and someone asked, what about, for example, a team working with COBOL? Is that a complicated subsystem team? Well, it depends. These days, we actually have good techniques and better tooling to evolve COBOL-based systems. It's not going to be at the same pace as your web applications or even mobile applications. But in fact, if we have team working on the COBOL system, we could expect that they work towards some sort of stream of value to the customers, right? That we don't see them as a separate thing, that they just do their own magic and we don't care about what they're doing. And then the platform team saying, without us, the streamlined teams couldn't deliver any value. Also, we hate talking to end users and all other people. Don't know if this rings a bell, but obviously, if we are trying to build this platform that is helpful for the other teams, we're going to need to talk to them, understand their needs, and so this approach would not be very helpful. And in general, no single approach will solve all your problems, obviously. So we have customers that maybe their entry point is Team Topologies, but we end up figuring out, well, you need help with your strategy. We might recommend wordly mapping as an approach to think about that. They might have problems with their system architecture. They might not understand their domains and their customers very well, so maybe domain-driven design can help as well. And so we had Simon presenting today, and tomorrow you have Suzanne Kaiser presenting and bringing together Team Topologies, wordly mapping, and domain-driven design. So I really think this is where we get sort of exponential value from these approaches, is understanding how we combine things to our context. This is sort of my conclusion in hindsight, that not when we were writing the book, but today I would say Team Topologies is in fact a socio-technical approach to increase flow and happiness. Turns out the two things, having faster flow, also helps with happiness. And one of the reasons is that faster flow requires teams to have more autonomy, to have a better purpose, and that helps with people feeling more engaged and having more fun at work. And if Team Topologies can help a little bit with this big problem we have in the industry, this is from a study late last year, where 44% of full-time employees in IT experience burnout. So personally, this is something really important to me if we can help change things around a little bit. Obviously, it's not just Team Topologies, but it can help a little bit. And me and Matthew, the other co-author, we really feel like we're on a mission to make work more humane and more effective for everyone through Team Topologies patterns and principles. All right, but I've been talking about flow, fast flow. What does that mean? From our perspective, it means you're going to need to have multiple ongoing streams of value to customers through software-enriched services done rapidly, safely, and sustainably. Where rapidly means probably at least a day. It doesn't mean that we cannot make changes faster, or if we're making changes slower, this could be at least some sort of goal for us, sort of a vision. We want to get to a point where we can say we have fast flow because we're able to deploy and deliver changes daily for our customers in a safe and sustainable way. There are many challenges that modern organizations face. How do we grow sustainably, right? So the way to not grow sustainably is to hire a lot of people when you're growing and then do layoffs very quickly when we're in a downturn situation, right? That's not the way to grow sustainably. And so maybe we shouldn't think about growth as a sort of linear thing with capacity and the number of people in the organization. How do we become high-performing, right? That's another important problem. And maybe it's not just about using AI and all the promises of 10x or whatever x productivity gains, right? We need to think about how we're organized, how we're helping teams do their best work. And another common one is how to engage our employees. So I would say if we have these rates of burnout and we have these rates of disengagement, then this is something we really need to be focused on. So, like I said, what I want to do in this talk is show you some challenges that different organizations have faced and what they did about it, and what are, in my opinion, the underlying principles that help them improve things around. So one common thing is having slow delivery due to high coupling between teams. Last year, JP Morgan, so we might have heard about them, they shared how they were applying Team Topologies to improve flow in one of their leading enterprise platforms. So it was a really interesting talk. Effectively, what they did was they had this, let's say, enterprise platform with thousands of developers. They took and started organizing the teams in value streams, what they called value streams. So this value stream here is composed of around 150 people, which is an interesting number if you're familiar with Dunbar's number, because it sort of corresponds to, on average, the limit of social, meaningful connections we can have with other people. I don't really know if they had that in mind, but it's an interesting coincidence at the very least. And so this is a value stream where these teams are providing products around asset classes. Don't ask me what that means, but something that makes sense for finance people and makes sense as a product, right? And so they reorganized in this way, and they also were interested in improving the prioritization and improving the visibility, actually, of what's happening. Why are we not able to deliver value faster? So they did this actual mapping of what you see on the left are, in the red lines, are all the dependencies between these teams, right? Where these dependencies mean to deliver some piece of work that has value to the customer, to the business, we're going to depend on these other teams for some kind of coordination, whether it's because we need other teams to do some work for us, or we need data from them, or some other sort of dependency we have. So that was before they reorganized. And so afterwards, they were able to reduce by about 60% those dependencies between these teams, those blocking dependencies. So to do that, they had to understand in more detail what is the nature of these dependencies. Why are these two teams in this relationship? And then they had to make teams more cross-functional, not to the extent that we had in the comic, but just bring in the skills that teams were missing to be able to do certain things in a more autonomous way. And they clarified interactions between teams. They made sure if teams are collaborating, we should have a specific purpose, right? And often the collaboration might be so that we can reduce or eliminate the dependency. If you always depend on another team to do the deployments for you or to do some other kind of task, how can we collaborate in order to allow the dependent team to have more autonomy on that sort of task? But that's pretty impressive. 60% of dependencies reduced through better team design. So I think the principle for me at play here, or one of the principles from Team Topologies, is that we need to decouple teams by decoupling their streams or products, right? The things of value to the customers, so that each team works on their own, which is essentially decoupling responsibilities that should not be coupled together, right? I also want to mention some practices that might be helpful if you're looking at these examples and thinking, yeah, this is what's happening. What can be some useful, simple starting points? So we created something called independent service heuristics, which kind of our internal joke is that it's sort of DDD light. It's just a simple technique to try to identify what are the things that should be separate, because in theory, we could run them eventually even as their own SaaS sort of service in the cloud. Not that we're going to do that, it's just the idea and the thinking, what would be needed for this to be independent. And so if the answer is a set of questions, so most of the answers are yes, then probably makes sense to have this service or product as a separate thing that's assigned to a team. Another common challenge in organizations we talk with is this lack of business agility due to organizational frictions. So there are many definitions of business agility, but the point here is that we can't just expect that at the team level we say you now should be more agile, you should be more autonomous, and that sort of magically that means the whole business is more agile, right? There's a lot more to it, and we need to have better understanding what kind of teams should we have, how should they interact to really get that sort of agility. And this was a problem that a company called Telenet. This is one of the major telecom companies in Belgium. I think they have around 4,000 employees. So interesting size. And what they were seeing is that any feature, however small, reaching production would entail multiple handoffs between different teams. So that diagram essentially shows, again, all these dependencies between different parts of the organization. Each of these kind of boxes essentially optimizing for their own work, but that was not aligned with the kind of features or value that we need to deliver to our customers. So they actually took quite a broad approach, and they looked at the organizational level. What are really the high-level streams that we care about, that the customer cares about? And so while we normally use these diagrams to show teams and their interactions, this is actually at the organizational level at this company. So you can see in the yellow at the top are the customer tribes. These are the groups of teams working on valuable products and services to the end customers. And then at the bottom, you have the blue platform tribes. These are the teams working on internal services and products for other teams to use and do their work more effectively. And then some enabling work from some other teams across the whole organization. So this is interesting because they took this 10,000 feet view of all the teams and sort of, if you like, it's an abstracted view of all the teams by grouping them into the tribes that make sense. And this helped them essentially be able to change this organization based on the market and the strategy and the customer needs. And that's what they mentioned in this industry example. This one, by the way, is published on our website. So there are several of this on teamtopologies.com. And what they're saying is that this loosely coupled org architecture allowed them to split, add, or merge tribes depending on the evolving strategic goals. I would say the overarching principle here at play is essentially minimize structural complexity so that you can have more agility. And they did that by grouping closely related streams of value, right? So a helpful practice that we have is using these diagrams that you've seen. And so this was a learning for me as well, that you can use that also at the tribe level, right? You can have different levels of abstraction. So when you're looking at this, you could go and say, well, right now, where we see challenges is in the subscription part. So we go into the manage my subscription tribe, and then we sort of drill down into, okay, what are the actual teams inside this tribe and what's happening between them? What are we missing in terms of being able to provide value faster to the customers around subscriptions? So this technique, these diagrams, actually available in different tools. They're also physical version if you prefer that. And so you can use them at sort of different levels of depth, right? At the team level or groupings of teams and seeing how they relate to each other. Another common challenge, especially organizations that are really trying to have this stream-aligned teams, focused on the end customer and the value they provide, is that they sometimes start to see inconsistent user experience, right? So you might have multiple products, and so customers are expecting to have a similar experience across these different projects, right? Because it's coming from the same organization, the same brand. So this was happening with BBC a few years ago. And what they shared was that they had these product teams. So these are the colorful ones working on different products, apps that the end user wants around education, news, sport, etc. So each individual product team achieved its own goals or aims quite well, but the user experience across multiple services wasn't as seamless and consistent. And what you can see here is that essentially these different teams had a lot of autonomy to build their product because they wanted them to make quick decisions and be able to move fast. But some duplication of some functionality started to happening. So what they did, which is a common approach, okay, let's push common things into some kind of platform, right? So in this case, a platform around some of this core functionality, around search, topics, etc. What's really interesting for me about this example is not so much that they had this platform approach, is that they didn't try to optimize too early and say, you know, even before these apps existed, oh, we already know that all the apps need this sort of functionality, let's start building the platform right now. They actually allowed this to emerge over time. And they were aware that this organizational refactor is a trade-off between optimizing for standardized commodity components, so having the things in the platform for others to use, and the autonomy that teams needed for innovative features. And this is a common challenge I see, is trying to optimize too early, standardize too early, when we don't really know if these things are going to be actually that shareable or not. So the principle here that I find interesting is optimizing for innovation and speed by giving teams autonomy when they need them, and allow a sort of eventual consistency and standardization to emerge later. And I know I'm taking some liberties to use the term eventual consistency here, but just bear with me. This is the interesting part, just allow things to emerge later on and not sort of jump into this tendency to, yes, this is the same, let's push it down to the platform. Allow things to evolve and be identified as something that is actually, when teams start to have to, each team has to deal with all this different functionality, and we start to see that they're really doing very similar things, that's probably the right time to try to push them down into the platform. And I wanted to share this quote from Adrian Cockcroft. This is actually not even like an article or anything, it was just a reply from him on a Mastodon thread. It's like, this is almost like ideal explanation of what we should expect if we're trying to work in an environment for fast flow. So he's saying the work is delivered in many small changes that are uncoordinated to enable flow. Management's job is to provide context, prioritization, and coordinate across teams. Lending resources if needed across teams to unblock things. It needs high trust culture to work well. So if you don't know, Adrian, he has worked on several big tech, Amazon, AWS, Netflix, eBay, etc. But I found this quote to be really an excellent sort of description of what we should expect, essentially, if we're working in this fast flow approach. So what's a practice that can help with this is actually the 3 interaction modes that I mentioned earlier. So especially as a platform group, we should make use of these 3 interaction modes. First, we collaborate with the product teams or the streamline teams to standardize the right things, not too much and not too little. We need to talk to them. Can't be like in the comic that you just try to imagine what they need or not. You actually need to have conversations. We facilitate the product teams by supporting them, allowing them to extend what the platform does, right? And that includes sort of from an engineering perspective, how do we allow teams to extend this functionality that is now in the platform, right? And facilitating means you are working together with those teams for a period of time to actually help them understand how we do this. And finally, ensure that that functionality works as expected. Once you introduce this type of platform, you need to make sure that it works just as well as your end products, if not better, right? Because the platform starts to be in the critical path for all of your products or applications, or the ones using the platform at least. Slow time to market. This is sort of a bit of a buzzword, right? But essentially, we're slow to deliver changes for different reasons. So this is actually quite recent, was at the DevOps Days conference early September. Dirk Lemmen from SAP, you might have heard about SAP as well. He was saying how, especially the compliance and security side of things, slows them down so much. Basically, they have to adhere to legal regulations on over 180 countries where they have customers, while their software is running for decades at the customers on-prem or on their own sort of cloud. This means teams essentially trying to get changes out and trying to use open source libraries, for example. They need to use multiple security tools. There's a lot of compliance checks they need to have in place. And so he was saying how, on average, teams are going to need to use 5 different tools, talk to 10 different teams just to get sort of the approval to use some open source library that they haven't used before, which is kind of crazy. And so they introduced a platform, internal platform that they called Hyperspace, but their approach was, we're not trying to make a platform that serves all the development teams. What we're trying to do is create this paved road based on what they call development procedures, but essentially different parts of the delivery lifecycle, especially those very complicated ones around compliance and security, to help the development teams be able to go much faster, right? So he said they brought together all the people, or a lot of the people who were previously sort of scattered around the organization, that were working on tools and also on the guidelines for security and compliance, and they brought them together so that they could build this sort of paved road for some of the development teams. So he was saying everyone from development to delivery under one organization reduced a lot of the friction. And they have a product management team because they are building a product. They're looking at the platform, the internal platform, as a product, right? And they're not trying to address all the potential customers of this platform, especially at the company as SAP. They're really trying to focus on what are the groups of teams that we can help that are suffering the most from this complicated, complex compliance and security process. And he also mentioned the goal of the platforms to relieve development teams from cognitive load due to common painful tasks. They're not just helping with compliance security, they're also helping with deployment pipelines and so on, but those are some of those common painful tasks. And I really like this approach because effectively with our end products, we also should have this goal of reducing cognitive load on our end users, right? So there's no real difference there. It's just the platform is more technical, developer focused in this case. So the practice is that, having product management inside the platform. I hear this a lot from organizations and leadership in internal platforms that they don't have the right product management skills and experience. So obviously, depending on the scale of your platform, how big, how many people you have working on it, you might have an actual product management team, or you might have a product manager in a smaller platform, or you might just have people in the platform team that have this sort of awareness for product management, which essentially means talking to customers, understand what they need, having a roadmap that makes sense, that is consistent, and being able to evolve the platform based on the adoption you're getting, the requests you're getting for change, and having also vision for this platform, right? He also mentioned that since this platform group that they created was around 350 to 400 people, even inside the platform group, they also had to sort of communicate what is the vision so that people feel like they understand what are we trying to achieve here inside the platform group. I think the overarching principle here for me is turning blocking dependencies into unblocking, right? Again, I'm taking some liberties, but sort of dependency inversion for teams. Allow teams to pull from the platform in this sort of self-service way that you see here at the bottom in a non-blocking way. Pull the things that you need, use those paved roads, versus having these blocking dependencies where we have to stop or we have to communicate with many different teams and use many different tools just to get something, one thing, which is getting some compliance check done or some security check, right? Another example, I quite like this one because it speaks to the need to adopt patterns and practices in your context. Just like there's not one single approach that's going to solve all your problems, there's also not one single application of the same pattern, right? So I hear this often, like people will say, yes, this makes sense. I've read the book, but we can't do this in my organization because of whatever reason. So again, a recent example from a company called GFK, and they work with consumer intelligence. Actually, they've been around for over 90 years, which is interesting. They have about 8,000 people and over 10,000 customers. And they are a safe shop, right? They follow the safe framework. So they had some interesting challenges. They are distributed around the world. And in order to move fast, they know they need to make decisions fast, right? And to make good decisions, we need knowledge. But they're sort of binded by the safe approach. And so what was really standing out to me from this example is how they were very constrained. They could not create a lot of new teams because we need everyone to be working on the delivery side. And they're following safe. But they found a way to sort of build into a sort of enabling approach, right? So they have this product increment. They do 4 sprints of delivery. And then they have one sprint they call the innovation and planning sprint, but it's essentially for knowledge sharing, right? So what they did was to have people who are experts. Remember the comic? They are still doing the delivery work because the organization is not sort of ready to assign these people to a more enabling role. But they will come together at least for one sprint every PI to actually help the other teams, help the other engineers to learn on the areas where they have some gaps. So essentially what they were doing is trying to break up these ivory towers where only this team or only this person really knows about this approach or this technology or whatever it might be, or is the only one who makes the architectural decisions. And they really were trying to disseminate the knowledge, have the knowledge flow across the organization, but they were constrained by the framework. And I would say not just the framework, but the thinking in the organization that we cannot have our experts doing enabling work. They must be doing the delivery work. But at least we get them together for one sprint and share knowledge across multiple teams and across people. So that's what really stood out to me from this example, was how they were able to fit in the pattern of enabling and sharing knowledge, even though they couldn't create this sort of enabling teams that we would normally suggest in team topologies, right? And this made me think that actually the practice here that you can adopt is think about the thinnest viable X, where X might be what's the thinnest viable platform, which is something we talk about in team topologies. But actually, X could be something else, right? What's the minimal or the thinnest viable enabling approach, right? Maybe we cannot create enabling teams because there's not sort of maturity in the organization to do that, but we can find ways where enabling patterns and approach are being used. So this is what I would say, to take a step back and consider what is the smallest implementation of X that will provide value to the organization. Even if you think, well, ideally we would have this dedicated teams or we would have something else, but given the current situation, what is the minimal sort of implementation of X? There are some examples of what could be a thinnest viable platform, but this example really was interesting to me because I hadn't thought of sort of a thinnest viable enabling approach. I think the principle here is to think about behaviors over structures. Obviously, we need the structures, we need to evolve the organization as well, but we shouldn't be waiting for, oh, we need to have this reorg, or we need to have this different processes or framework, or we need to have a certain scale to be able to create platform teams and enabling teams and complicated subsystem. Actually, we can think about adopting behaviors and these patterns of enabling self-service platforms and things like that, even if we don't have dedicated teams. And finally, I wanted to mention this example, which really sort of warmed my heart when I saw this talk about team topologies being a blueprint for a better society and how it has already changed your life and you didn't know it. So actually, it only changed your life if you live in the UK, because this is about public services in the UK. So they were sharing how during COVID-19 vaccination, if you remember that, seems like a long time ago now, actually they needed to go much faster than what they would usually do in terms of their digital services and so on. So although the actual, what was visible to the users is basically a web page where you book your vaccine, actually underneath that, in the back end, there was a lot that needed to be happening. If you remember, there was almost every day there was new information, new guidelines. There was also a lot of integration that they needed to do with different systems of record and also regulatory systems to know, who can get the vaccine, who should get the vaccine, etc. And so they really adopted these principles of fast flow in a way that allowed them to do this in record time. Otherwise, they estimated it would normally take several months to do the same thing. And so if it's possible to go very fast in healthcare, it's possible in other extremely regulated environments, right? I think that's really interesting to think about. Like I said before, these days, to me, Team Topologies, I see it as a socio-technical approach to increase flow and happiness. And just wanted to show you a bit of the evolution, and over the years, or these last 5 years, not so much just to, so obviously this is not a complete list, because these are the examples that we can show, because there's public resources showing the adoption of Team Topologies. But it's more for us to realize that, first of all, most of these organizations, they're not applying Team Topologies to the whole organization. They're not trying to do a big, change everything in one go. So in some cases, they're adopting some of the ideas, but not others from Team Topologies. In some cases, they are using them in one business area and not the rest of the organization. So it can take different forms. And what I'm hoping is that you can look at this and realize whatever your industry, whatever your business, or the business of your organization, probably there are examples you can find and you can relate to, whether it's because it's the same sort of industry or because you have similar problems. And so that you can see how other organizations have applied these ideas and bring them back to your organization as well. So I'd like to end with this quote from John Cutler. The messy middle can be tackled. The thinking around this is big, but the actual work is small. So I think it's good to have a vision, especially when you understand the principles of Team Topologies and other approaches. What is the vision? Where do we want to get to? Do we want to get to that fast flow where we can deliver changes on a daily basis at least? And then figure out what's needed to get there on a step-by-step approach, right? What can we do today based on our context, our limitations, the maturity and the culture of the organization, and let's go from there. So hopefully the examples I gave show you how it's possible to take the ideas, principles, and patterns and apply and use what makes sense in your current situation, and then go forward from there. This is the main website, teamtopologies.com, where you can find a lot of the resources, the practices, key concepts, etc. I would say these days there's actually a really healthy and very interested community around Team Topologies. There's a conference called Fast Flow around Team Topologies where people come together, and a lot of practitioners and advocates that are really trying to show the same as I tried today, how these ideas apply in different contexts. So go there if you want to look at some of the examples I talked about and other resources. Thank you again for being here. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to answer any questions.